What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again from metaltrenches.com. If you're new here and you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button and be sure to like the video if you enjoy it. And stick around because there's plenty more where this came from. And today I wanted to do a bit of a list on something I've been getting nostalgic about lately. And that is the ways in which I used to consume my metal music and find out about new artists and bands and things like that. Because the way I do that now is definitely very different from how I used to back in the day. Because it's so easy now with things like Bandcamp and Spotify and all that good stuff. You've got the whole internet just really working to your favor. Whereas back in the day, it was a little bit different, and there were some pretty specific channels that allowed us to do so. So I've got kind of 5 major categories I've broken down of ways in which I used to find my metal albums and music. So starting with number 5, a big one here, MTV. So believe it or not, there was a time where MTV actually played music videos. It was music television.
No way! Yes way!
And those were good times. In particular, a big program that caused me to discover a lot of bands that are still kind of my favorites to this day is Headbangers Ball, the second incarnation hosted by Jamie Josta.
It's more mind-blowing music and ass-kicking artists than you can handle. MTV2's 2-hour block of metal hits the air this week with host Jamie Josta from Hatebreed. Headbangers Ball, tonight at 10, only on MTV2.
Thanks to them, I discovered Lamb of God, Norma Jean, and countless others that I would have otherwise missed. I think that was my introduction to Pig Destroyer too. Like, I was watching that late at night in the dorms, and one of their music videos came on, and that was just the way of things. And then there were other things too on MTV, to a lesser extent VH1, some kind of off-brand music video stations doing it as well. But I think another big thing on MTV was they would really put some effort into playing a pretty steady rotation of ads for upcoming albums. And in particular, I remember when Oh God, The Aftermath was coming out, they had heavy rotation on that ad that had the clip from the Bayonet Work music video with the "This is between." Like, I remember hearing that over and over again and having it stuck in my head. And you better believe I pre-ordered that album. So it was pretty effective. So hats off to MTV back in the day when it was actually good and it wasn't 16 and pregnant and all that bullshit. So yep, that's number 5. All right, moving on to number 4. This is potentially going to be a controversial choice, but it has to be put out there because they've had their role, and that is actually Hot Topic. Hot Topic has gotten a lot of grief over the years. There's a lot of stereotypes there, some of them fair. South Park's made plenty of fun of it too.
What the hell are they doing? They're putting it into it! Ah!
And hey, like, I'm not here to defend Hot Topic, but at the end of the day, they used to have listening stations in every store. And those listening stations had a good, like, anywhere from like 6 to like 15 albums of new releases at any given time. And so I could walk in the store and say what you will about the people who work there, the people that shop there, the clothes that they sell, whatever. But I could walk in there and they would have some prime albums that this day are now like classics. I particularly remember going in one day and they had the first big albums from Bleeding Through and As I Lay Dying. And I had never heard of them before, but it was just one of those things where you'd see the cover and if it caught your interest, you'd just grab the headphones and you'd press play. And I was blown away by both of those, ended up buying them, and countless other albums that were from bands that I had no idea about. Like, I honestly probably wouldn't have discovered As I Lay Dying until a couple years later if I hadn't run into it there. So again, you can shit on Hot Topic all you want, but I have to give them major props for helping me discover a ton of critical albums and just giving me easy access to finding them, to easily buy them. And so on a smaller note too, there were other record stores too that also had listening stations. So really any record store that still did that. I had mentioned in other videos and episodes, there was another local store that even allowed you to basically bring up the disc and you could just play it whenever. Also, Reckless Records in Chicago is like a chain of sell a lot of like secondhand CDs, and they had a dedicated metal section there too. And same deal. You could bring it up to the counter. They let you listen to it. I think I discovered Living Sacrifice that way. Also Extol and plenty of other things. All right. Next up was kind of like you already had to sort of be in the scene to start getting these, and it started you down a rabbit hole. But another critical thing for me was buying a metal CD, and then when I opened it, getting that little insert that had kind of the ad for all the other bands in that style, and particularly on that same label. I remember Trustkill in particularly really rings a bell with this, opening up, say, a Poison the Well album, and also having an ad that included Nora and the Caitiff Choir and all this other stuff too. And so I'd kind of look at those, see what caught my eye, and I would use that to further guide my interest when I went to the store to check out the listening station to see if they had it. Or this will be kind of a segue into the next thing for number 2. But before I get there, another aspect of that too was getting on the mailing lists for some of these labels and getting the samplers. I think one of those that really stands out to me is I got one in the dorms that showed up in my mailbox, and it had a bunch of good stuff on it, but in particular it had the first big single from Trivium, like Light to the Flies. And while I never became like a huge Trivium fan, that was what helped me and a bunch of people discover that band. It was this great kind of like viral way to sort of just get the word out on a lot of different things. I think they had the first single from 3 Inches of Blood on that one. I think there was a All That Remains song on there, although I was already familiar with them. But anyways, all that to say, those inserts and samplers really helped me discover a lot of other stuff. All right, and then that segue to number 2, big one that a lot of us probably are slightly ashamed to admit, but it was a big deal, and that's file sharing. File sharing, absolutely huge back in the day, obviously. Starting with Napster, but I'd say by the time I was actually getting into metal, it was more so Limewire by this point and other kind of like offshoots of that same idea. And while I'm a big proponent, especially nowadays, of buy your music, support your artists, don't just steal the music, I think file sharing still had a very important role in where we find ourselves with the metal scene right now and where I find my tastes. And I just think I wouldn't own nearly close to as many of these albums I do now if it weren't for initially discovering them through file sharing. And so, yeah, we'd look at those like ads, and then I'd go on, I'd search them up on LimeWire or whatever, and I'd download them and I'd check them out. And initially, yeah, I was kind of getting the music for free, but later on down the road, or sometimes even that same week, I'd go out and buy the album if I liked it enough. And I'm happy to say now that my computer collection of songs pretty well matches up to what I've got here on the shelf. And then, of course, the stuff that I get from labels and stuff to review and things of that nature.
I'm kind of a big deal.
Really?
People know me.
But in any case, there's that. And then also CD burning was a big aspect of this too. You know, Jimmy's got this album, I've got this other album, Susie's got this other album. We'd each burn our album, and we'd, get our permanent marker out and write on it and put the band name and the album name, and we'd burn copies for each other. So we each collectively had kind of different stuff. Like, I didn't own any Opeth albums back then, but my friend Paul did, so he gave me all the Opeth albums. I had a bunch of the Darkest Hour albums, and so I would copy those for him, and so on and so forth. We'd all kind of share the wealth. And then later on, with the birth and explosion of iTunes, and then also AOL Instant Messenger, which just rest in peace a couple years ago now, you could, if you were on the same network, or even not even, with Instant Messenger, you didn't even have to be on the same network. If somebody had made a folder for file sharing, you could go into that person's folder and just download music directly from them. And I remember I discovered this one dude who had everything. He had everything from Aphex Twin to Slayer. So I got tons of music from him. And then when I was in the dorms in college, iTunes, I'm not even sure if it still does it now. I haven't really looked at it, but you could back then listen to other people's playlists and music if they were on the shared network. And since the dorms, we were all plugged into the same Ethernet, we were all interconnected with each other. And that's how we did a lot of our gaming and stuff. But I would use it to open other people's libraries and see what music they had, and discovered a lot of different stuff that way as well. So file sharing had a big impact on where we're at now. But final disclaimer, if you love the music and you want to see it survive, at the end of the day, no matter how you got the music and discovered it initially, please do go out and actually buy your music so that you can support the artists, and also let the labels know where the tours should be going. And that's how you make that happen. All right, and then last but not least, another thing that still kind of exists now, but is just not the same as it used to be, and that's MySpace. Before there was Bandcamp, there was MySpace, and MySpace served kind of a similar purpose. It wasn't nearly as great as Bandcamp is now, because there's kind of like less to download from there, but it was a great way for bands to do kind of a similar thing. Create their own page, put their art up there, create a bio, and sample a lot of their music. And so you could go and listen to it there. And I would say I discovered a lot of, especially local bands and smaller bands in this way, but there are other bands that like got really big that started off this way. And you even, in certain circles, you hear about like the MySpace era of that music. If you listen to Mathcast and frequent the Mathcore Index page, you'll regularly hear that phrase, because that was a big thing for mathcore for sure, and for certain aspects of hardcore. But particularly, I've found that in that subgenre, there's this special love for MySpace, because a lot of bands kind of got their start on there. And well, even now, like there are bands coming out what they call it like the MySpace revival, because they have a similar sound to those bands that initially came onto MySpace. F's in the chat for MySpace, because if you go there now, it is not what it used to be. It is very different, and I don't even know how it still exists, honestly. I'm going on a tangent here, but I don't know what demographic actually uses the current incarnation of MySpace, but I digress. So that's it. The 5 kind of major sources of where I consumed my metal music and grew my passion and expanded my taste and discovered so many bands that are now my favorites to this day, and kind of started me down the road that continues to this day to get bigger and bigger. And for those of you who don't remember this period, be thankful for all the ways that you get music now, because it is so much easier to discover bands. In fact, now the opposite problem is true, that there's like so much music and so many bands that it's just hard to figure out where you're going to narrow it down. What are you going to focus on? But yeah, hopefully that's where sites like mine come into play, because that's what I see as part of my role, is to sort of sift through all the badness and try to bring you at least what I consider, in my humble opinion, to be the best and brightest. And obviously, my word is not the end all be all, but that's why there's plenty of other great sites out there to help you do that. And hopefully we're serving the purpose for you. But in any case, I think that'll do it for now. Thank you as always for watching, and please do stick around, because there's plenty more videos to check out. There's tier lists, there's bands that changed my life retrospectives, new album reviews, new album roundups. There's a podcast where I interview lots of really interesting bands and musicians. And so yeah, definitely check those out. I'll have some up on the end screen. And please, again, do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I put out a new video. I try to do it at least once a week, and then also the podcast at least twice a month. And I'll even do track premieres and things like that. But also hop down in the description and you can find links to all of our social media where you can follow us. Also, you can join the mailing list, which is a great way to just make sure you don't miss anything week to week. I send out that email personally. And then, of course, there's Patreon and Subscribestar. Just $1 a month makes a huge difference, and I'd really appreciate it if you donated to it. But that's it. Flight of Icarus, signing off. I will see you in the trenches.